Hi, everybody. My name is Jeremy Dodson. Before I get started, I just want to take a second to apologize for the sound of my voice. I know none of you have ever heard me speak, but I don't normally talk like this. Maybe you can tell there's something going on in my throat. I don't know what it is. There's no pain, and I'm not sick. It's just that my voice has kind of been gone for almost a week now, and it's starting to get a little better today. So here we are. And I sure do appreciate your patience and your understanding. The article I chose to read for this project is an article about Jonathan Edwards, and it's written by Douglas L. Winiarski. The title is Jonathan Edwards, Enthusiast, Radical Revivalism, and the Great Awakening in the Connecticut Valley. And Jonathan Edwards preached his most famous sermon, which is Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. And he preached it in Suffield, Massachusetts on July 6, 1741. And in this article, Douglas Winiarski examined how some of the people responded to Edwards' sermon, as well as how some of Edwards' contemporary in the clergy responded to the people's response to Edwards' sermon. The revival that erupted during this period of time was known as the Great Awakening. It came to be known as the Great Awakening, but not everybody who experienced or saw this awakening was convinced that this awakening was a move of God. After Edwards' sermon, after that night, after Edwards got finished preaching his sermon, some people were reported to be crying and moaning even, and some people were screaming out in fear and terror of going to hell. And this behavior not only happened in Suffield, but it began to spread throughout the region. And it began to cause a great concern among the leading clergy in that day, in that region. A contemporary of Edwards, whose name was Daniel Wadsworth, wrote this in his diary. He wrote that some of his parishioners had been reformed and converted. So he believed that sure, some of these people were actually experiencing a move of God and converting to Christianity. But he also wrote that he feared others were only turning from one sort of wickedness to another. Some of the behaviors that happened after this among the people were dreams. People were having dreams and going into trances, and they were having visions. And oftentimes they would have these disturbances during church services. Some would actually barge into a church and cause great disturbances with one sort of behavior or another, or people who went to church would do such things as that. As we read previously, some of the people were converted, but like often happens even today, they remain, try to act Christian for a little while, and then sooner or later they go back to their own old ways of sin and sinfulness. And it happened then just as it happens now. But the new people, the new converts and becoming more liberal people, they were known as the New Lights, where the old conservative belief system was known as the Old Lights. Those who followed that were known as the Old Lights. And there was a lot of great contention between these two separate groups. And this contention lasted for decades, or years and decades, whatever. But many laid the blame for this contention right at the feet of Jonathan Edwards. Some said that he intentionally preached his famous sermon just to cause this contention. They said that he knew the people would respond in this manner to his sermon, and so he preached the sermon just to cause this trouble and cause this contention. The friction between the Old Lights and the New Lights would last for decades. There was a young guy who came to Suffield in the following year, not long after Edwards had preached a sermon, and he came in 1742. A young fellow named Ebenezer Gay. He was a young minister ordained in Suffield in 1742, and he was plagued by infighting in his church almost immediately as a result of this behavior. He was more conservative, and the New Lights who had been left over from Edwards' sermon did not really care for him in his conservatism. Suffolk's New Light faction would continue to disrupt Ebenezer Gay's pastorate for decades after Edwards' sermon, and all throughout the height of the Great Awakening. You know, this just verifies really what the Lord told us, 2,000 years ago, and in the parable of the souls. Many people respond differently to the Word of God. And so, and we can read about that in that parable of the souls. Some hear the Word of God and produce good fruit, and others hear the Word of God and they do not produce good fruit. It's just a fact of life. And, we don't typically need to be, I think, judging people's, what we need to judge when we examine people and ourselves is our fruit. And so, there's some weird people out there who do weird things. Maybe some people raise their hands in church and others don't. But the fact of the matter is, what we need to be examining is the fruit. So thank you.